Hello everyone, welcome to the Frontline Club. You may have noticed that we have a slight change of personnel today. Unfortunately, Patrick Coburn couldn't make it due to illness. However, we're very lucky to be joined by Paul Taggart last minute, whose breadth and depth in writings around the subject of populism deserves its own interrogation. But tonight, we're very lucky that you stepped in last minute to talk to Ece Temelkuran, so please give them both a round of applause.
Thank you very much. As Austin says, I'm apologise who I'm not, and I'll be who I am. But we're here really to talk about Ece's new book, and to use that as a jumping off point to talk about some of the challenges to democracy and some of the sorts of challenges that democracy is currently facing. I'll just say a little bit, very quickly. I'm not going to praise the book, but I'm just going to...
Why not?
That's your job. I mean, the thing I'd say about the book, that from my point of view, is it mixes personal experience, it mixes a breadth, a range of looking globally, a range of experience, both of yourself and of others. And I think it's a very accessible guide way into the book. I've learnt from what you say, we shouldn't be passionate. Apparently British is not supposed to be passionate about anything, so I'll be mutely positive about it. But what I really wanted to do, and it seems to me that what you're doing essentially is looking at what's happened in Turkey as your starting point, but it's much broader than that. And the experience is basically to say, these are the dangers, this is how you lose a country. This is my experience and the experience of my country, and I'm looking around, I'm looking globally at what's happening across the world, across Europe, but obviously more broadly than that. And I'm looking out for danger signs, and there is a real passion here, there's a real cri de coeur. You're saying, this is a warning. There are 7 kind of warning signs that you give. Can I take you to the end of the story a little bit before we start, which is to say, what is it? Where is it we're going? Clearly you're unhappy about the things that you're seeing, or you're very concerned about them. What's the danger that we're heading towards? Because we can make our own politics, our own political analysis of what's happening now. But where do you think we're heading if we don't listen to what's in this book?
So you want to jump to the end?
I want to jump to the end. I like to mix it up.
I think we already arrived where we're supposed to be. I'm not only talking about Turkey, I'm talking about Europe and United States. But one of the common patterns, especially emotional, one of the emotional common patterns of what we are going through globally is the feeling of this can't get any worse than this. They cannot do that. No. Somebody will stop it, and so on. And when people start saying that, it's one of the signs that we already arrived where we aren't supposed to be. And I think in this country and in other European countries, especially in the United States, people keep saying that, no, it cannot be worse than this. No, they cannot do it. And that reaction is also accompanied by the emotion of, is this still my country? Am I completely out of touch, or this country is going insane? And when these emotions start occurring, when they are voiced, you can be certain that you already arrived there, the starting point of losing your country. It is not easy for people to hear this, I think, because they have a tendency to trust the institutions and trust the consensuses in their countries, especially countries like Britain, where centuries-old pillars are holding up the institutions and establishment and traditions and so on. But it doesn't come like a earth-shattering, groundbreaking, and a big earthquake or something. It doesn't break the pillars. It just eats them from inside, and then once you notice what really happened, it's always a little bit too late. So actually I wrote the book for all of us not to arrive there, completely losing our countries.
But are you saying that?
You want me to give an apocalyptic description of what can happen?
I suddenly want you to
But
think. Yeah.
I do think that
What's after this?
there are these horrible Hollywood movies like Hunger Games or any other dystopian movies where people are suffering under a dictatorship, where dictators are all very serious. They're frowning, and they're dictator. We can see that, and so on. It doesn't happen like that. I think they dictators nowadays come with a grin. They don't frown, and they don't wear hotkeys. So we are there. It's just that people don't notice, I think. In this country, there is a big, I don't want to say the B word, but there is a big decision in the making, which will change the destiny of the nation, and people are making fun of, making jokes about it. Don't you think this is political insanity? This is like complete insanity, in fact. Don't you think this is something pathological?
Well, I wonder. We always joke about politics, and we talk about.
Yeah, I know, but
the idea of actually gallows humour when it gets really dangerous. That's when you really have
this
to
country
laugh
is
about
famous
it.
for it, and then I think they still think that it might, protect their sanity from what's going on during Brexit. Making jokes about it and being sarcastic about what's going on. But I think it's creating a very comfortable shelter for them. Just like it did for us 10 years ago in Turkey. We thought as long as we could laugh at Erdogan, everything would be all right. And then it didn't turn out that way, and there was nothing to laugh at the end.
I take your point. Okay, so you're concerned about the present to not have to worry about, or not, well, forget the apocalypse, we're nearly there to some extent. Where are we? What are we losing? Let's go back to the other direction then. You're concerned about losing a country.
Mm-hmm.
What's your experience of what's been lost in Turkey and what we're in danger of losing more broadly if we succumb to these forces? I want to come to in a minute to what these forces are.
Yeah.
What do you think's being lost?
Actually, I didn't write this book to explain what we lost in Turkey, but rather for you not to lose your country or French or the United States, and what they should be careful about, how these steps go forward and how you don't realize them when it's happening. What we lost in Turkey, and we didn't realize it when we were losing it, I think, not as much as we do now. We lost the ground that we were standing on. We lost our consensuses, and we lost our common code, socially, morally, and politically. It was so disrupted at some point that we didn't understand that we were going into a mess that we cannot come out in the end. And this is happening more or less the same way during Brexit now. It doesn't. It's not important what will Brexit bring or what will happen at the end and who's going to make the decision, what decision it will be. It's not important. But what you are going through right now is disrupting your rationale. It is disturbing your self-image, and it is ruining the faith of people in institutions. House of Commons has become a mockery in European Parliament very recently. So yeah, this makes a lot of difference. This makes a lot of damage. It creates a lot of damage on personal level for citizens, but also on social level for the entire country. And we lost that in Turkey. We lost our self-image. We lost the idea of who we are, and the bombardment of news, bombardment of information, and more importantly, the constant bombardment of changing topics during the day, and news topics and so on. So much information, so much. It made us feel helpless, I think, at some point, and we were bored, and we became numb after a while. So I think that might happen to several countries in Europe as well. People in the United States first thought that, when Trump came to power, they thought that they'll be, reactionary. They reacted the first day, and they thought that they can react every day with the same strength, with the same outrage. But it's exhausting. You cannot do that, and you can do that for 1 year, maybe for 15 years. You cannot do that, and then at the end, either you give up, or you become tired, or you're consumed. So this is one of the things that countries or people lose on the way, and they don't notice losing it.
Isn't politics always about conflict, though? I mean, the exhaustion that you're portraying. I mean, that's part of the weft and weave of politics in general. We expect all political systems to, even a big issue like Brexit, to be a very contentious issue and divisive and to involve conflict. It shouldn't be easy. If it's easy, it's not politics to some extent. In a sense, the reaction you're portraying is, well, you don't like the way the politics is going, but it's a different form of politics.
Don't you think it's a childish form of politics? Like, two sides, like football teams, Brexiteers, anti-Brexit, and so on and so forth. This is not politics. This is just being forced to two options only, two choices. Politics is something else, and I think during 1980s, starting from the end of 70s, 80s and 90s, the entire world was pushed to be childish. We were infantilized to think that politics is diminished to choices. It's about this or that, and there cannot be a third option. There is no alternative, as the motto goes by Mrs. Thatcher. Yeah, we were. It's not. It didn't happen with Brexit. It didn't happen with Erdogan. It didn't happen with Trump. They are only the consequences. We were pushed to choose between two things in every country almost, and people chose the wrong thing mostly. So we are here.
No, absolutely. I fully agree that. I mean, that this dichotomy, or sort of Manichaean conception of politics, or
it's like a cartoon movie, like the evil and the good, the villain and the hero, and so on.
I fully buy that, but it seems to me that what the forces that you're identifying are really criticising or giving rise to is that polarisation, that dichotomous infantilisation of politics, as you would call it. But what's been lost is the pluralism of politics.
Exactly.
Right. That's where the danger is that they've closed down things to make it false dichotomies.
Yeah, like people tend to think that all of a sudden Trump happened. All of a sudden you have Nigel Farage. All of a sudden there is Putin or Erdogan or Orban in Hungary and so on. They are really the consequences of what we went through 1970, starting from 80s. And one of them, yes, it's infantilization, but the other one was forced depolitization. For some reason, people do not want to think, talk about this. I really don't understand why, but it is so obvious to me that what the system brought, what the dominant system brought to this world in 1980s, is now flourishing, and ironically, this establishment is threatened by its own children, so to speak.
What do you mean by the system? What's the system
Well,
you're
Trump.
thinking of?
I mean, like, imagine Trump. I'm
trying not to, but
well, really seriously imagine. If Paris Hilton wasn't a, important person in 2003, when Iraq war was happening, ironically, it happened the same time. Paris Hilton coming out and Iraq war, Iraq bombardment, Baghdad was bombarded at the same time. If people were not mesmerized by Paris Hilton, if she wasn't a role model, do you think we would have Trump in the United States now? I don't think so. So it was like, the dominant ideology told us politics is not for you. Politics is an administrative job that we adults should do, who understand from numbers. And you work. and you go to the mall and buy the things you want to buy because you are free to buy them. I'm giving this very, very crude, description of the situation. But this idea, this ideology of life was imposed on us, and then, from the politics, coming from the politics, and then it trickled down to our daily lives, creating these humans who really lived on the desire to have more and the fear of having less, and meanwhile entertaining themselves by other people's tragedies, watching Kuwait getting bombarded and talking about how, wow, it's great technology, we can watch a war 24 hours live on TV now. So this type of mentality, this type of human, obviously will lead the way to a guy like Trump, who thinks that really, having more is enough, having less is fearful, and politics is stupidity. So it's what happened, what was imposed from down, from up to down, and then now it's coming down to up, to change the politics of the world.
Yeah, I certainly buy the argument that there's something about celebrity culture and the distraction of all that.
It's not only celebrity culture; it's a changing, serious transformation of morality.
But that's been there before. I mean, the appeal that you describe of saying there's us getting on with our everyday lives and not having to bother with politics, actually just wanting government to get on with it. And those elites up there, watch them, look at them, look at Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This is exactly the same narrative. This is nothing new. This is 'twas ever thus within democracy. I mean, populism is always pulled on that tension there between the fact that people want to be participatory but actually might not even want to participate. The appeal of people saying, oh yeah, but we've been left out, and we are dutiful and we are virtuous, and you talk about the real people. It's a very old leitmotif of democratic politics. So in that sense,
what's new, I think, is obviously what started with Margaret Thatcher and Reagan is something transforming into something more absurd and insane at the moment. And one of the reasons is the economic crisis, the crisis of neoliberalism, because it was a booming, economy was booming then, and their insanity was not as visible as today's populists' insanity, I think. You didn't buy it?
What concerns me is that you're binarizing the world.
I'm sorry?
You're binarizing the world. You're dichotomizing it yourself. You're doing what you claim the populists are doing. You're saying, well, there's normal good politics and then there's bad politics. Aren't you in danger of doing exactly what you're critiquing these populists for doing?
Well, in the book, I am telling more about it. So that's why I said this is a very crude explanation of it. But there's about this. Shall I mention the Times review or not? I'm thinking about that now. There was such an interesting point there as well. Dichotomizing the situation and being the part of the problem and so on. I do think that there will be a war, not actual war, but there is already a hostility between people who are supporting populist leaders, right-wing populist leaders, and the others. And by saying the others, I mean people who are capable of critical thinking, who are still holding on to that capability. So when it's in the early ages, one feels, not to make, let's say, very crude distinctions between these two groups. It feels, a little bit elite and disturbing and so on. But then it becomes so clear, especially in Turkey in later stages. This dichotomy becomes so clear that it is you cannot it's not easy to reject it. It's there, and they are hostile to you, so you become kind of defensive as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the powers of populism is it forces its opponents to act in ways that are quite like it. You see, and that's I mean, I think that's. I don't have an answer to this. You'll be much more brave than me, but it's very difficult not to dichotomize politics if you're faced by populists.
Trying to find answers is not about courage, by the way. I'm not a very courageous person, but it is about the need. You still don't need it as much as I do, maybe. I'm not talking personally. I'm talking in terms of countries. But when you really need answers, you have to come up with a strategy. That's why I wrote the book, in fact, because as you might know, there are many books about populism at the moment. Well, not many, but there are books. People are writing them, and so on. And the concept of right-wing populism or populism is becoming an intellectual industry, even. And every day on newspapers you can see articles about it. The bad thing about it is that it is as if these books are talking to each other, not to people. Right? Because intellectuals, people who write, they actually do not face with the daily consequences of this phenomena as much as the people who do not write books. Yeah. So and those people need to know that they are not losing their mind, that there is actually something insane in their country. One, they don't want to feel alone. And second, they want to know what they should do. It's not that I tell them what they should do, but I tell them, let's come together and think about this, talk about this, because you are not alone. Your country is not unique when it comes to right-wing populism. And we have to find a global solution for this global, problem. Otherwise, I can go on and on and on, without making crude explanations, so to speak. But what is the benefit there for today's world, for today's people who are really suffering and feeling alone?
I think you're providing a very clear roadmap, actually. I think you're saying here there are 7 signs that I see. You've talked about some of them in passing, about the laughing things off, about the creating a new movement, and you're actually being very specific about what the sort of the pathology of populism is. No, I think you translate.
I try to tell people what not to do, because there are easy way out, and none of them work. So at least they know that they shouldn't be wasting their time and energy trying that, because it has already been tried very hard in Turkey and other countries as well.
I'm asked 2 more questions, and I want to open it up for other people. The first is this: you mentioned very briefly at one point there are cases of populism that are not of the right. You mentioned Greece and you mentioned Spain. And how does that fit into your analysis then? If it's is that a good response to right-wing populism, left-wing populism?
I think this is a right-wing approach to not to distinguish right-wing and left-wing politics and call them both populists. And this is a very good game of messing up with people's minds, because populism is something else, and doing popular politics, doing politics for popular is something else. Populist, and the main distinguishing aspect is populists claim that they represent 100% of the society, and they redefine society, whereas using populist discourse for a leftist, politician is something else. If you're a leftist, you don't claim that you are representing 100% of the population. You cannot homogenize that, at least.
Oh, well, but I'm not sure that's. I mean, you say in your book that people. One of the things I really like, you talk about people. That populists appeal to the real people. And I think that's a much more. I don't think populists ever say we want everybody. They say actually we want the right people, the virtuous people. And I'll tell you who they are. No, I won't tell you who they are. I'll tell you who they're not. You know, they're not immigrants. They're not welfare scroungers. They're not professors. They're not elites. You know, they know they're not. I mean, I think there's a that you've got that tension in the book there. Actually, it's not 100%. I think they're much more specific about who they're really appealing to. That core constituency. That's a much more powerful tool for them, and that's not dissimilar from what the left has
Well,
always
populism
said.
is not an ideology. It's a mannerism. It's a way of doing politics. So that's why I keep on saying right-wing populism all the time.
Well, I mean, I don't think it is. I think it's an ideology. I'll demur on kind of core principles there. I mean, for some to see it as a way of doing politics, I would say there are core ideas.
There is this. You see, there is this discussion going on. We can discuss this. I read probably all the books that's to be read about this, but that doesn't take us anywhere. You know, in terms of daily life and in terms of what we are going to do today.
You're talking about trying to find concrete things that we can identify and analyse.
Because don't you think it is urgent now?
I think it's very urgent. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
like 29th of March, you're having this, decision or happening. It's happening 29th, and then there won't be much time to talk about that.
Well, I think politics is pluralist. I think Brexit has populist elements within it, but not all Brexit is populist. I think that we've got to disentangle the two. I mean, I'm an academic, so it's more complicated. I want to take these concepts apart. I'm going to give you one more challenge and then open up the room, if that's okay. My challenge to you is this: you're going to, and the challenge I'm going to give to you is one that I give to myself. I'm not saying it's not an ad hominem attack. It's a problem that I think I face. Is that I've been writing about populism for over 20 years, and I've been in many conferences and I've done many things like this. But I'm not sure I've ever actually been in the room at any of these events where there is a populist.
Yeah, you're so lucky.
No, I'm not. It's very difficult. I mean, and how do you, the point about that is not to make it. It's a really serious point. It's how do you reach populists? How would populists read and react to these ideas if they engage with them? That's the question I would have to you. That's the real challenge. How do you make a populist react to it? You know, those who already agree with you, we can mobilise. And I think you're doing a good job of that. You're sort of saying, this is the dangers, these are the concerns. Come on, get moving, guys. Look at the problems. But how do we address that to the people who are otherwise attracted to populism? The real people.
There's this very compassionate. It's a very compassionate approach, yours. Because when there's a populist, if there was a populist, I wouldn't say populist, but right-wing person who would hate us, we would know it by now, hopefully. Because normally they show themselves. Don't worry, they do this, something. And being a writer and a journalist, and doing making political comments, blah blah blah. That gives you a lot of chance to meet them, and to be threatened and to be slurred, whatever, everything you can think of. Yeah. So I came face to face with them, and it's a very compassionate, very generous approach to try to find a common ground with these people, especially the ones who are vetted very well, who are really, energized and so on. And I think Western media, especially since Trump came to power and since Brexit began, they have been obsessed with this question. Let's find a common ground. Let's understand them. Let's, find a common. The thing is, one of the important things I think important things in the book is that there comes a point you lose the faith, the basic fundamental faith. That if you speak to a human in a human language, he would understand, as Camus says. You lose that faith. There comes that point, and you wonder to yourself, how could they be so cruel? After passing that, threshold, it's not easy to be so generous and compassionate. I'm not vibrating with outrage here, but I want to tell that let's not be so naive. This is politics, and we are not responsible of finding the common ground. We are not the only ones who is responsible to find the common ground. And when insanity is coming towards you, that kind of compassionate, generous approach does not really help. Okay. Neither to you nor to them.
Okay. All right.
Thank
should
you.
we be brave and open up to questions from the
For
audience?
the sake of the live stream, please wait for the mic to get to you. Thank you.
I'm a born optimist, and I see what's happening at the moment as the effect of social media and the information age, that it's giving a constituency, a voice to people that in our current democratic systems perhaps haven't had a voice, and perhaps not deemed acceptable a lot of their views. And I think it's beholden on the Liberal Democrats to hold the ground and not panic, and work with these people so that they learn that the best way forward is freedom of speech, freedom. So my question is, I see it as a great thing about democracy. As long as we have freedom of speech, we'll work it through. But I just want to ask you a question about where do you draw the line between populism and democracy?
Democracy is not the best regime. I mean, like, it's not a perfect regime, let's put it that way. And when it is stripped of social justice, it affects every layer of society. And when you shape the society without the idea of social justice, democracy becomes a decorative, regime. So it changes it changes the perception of every concept, starting from freedom of speech to equality. So I think what we should understand from democracy shouldn't be separated from social justice, and then we can, work our way through towards everything else. That's why when people talk about fight for democracy, and that all those slogans doesn't mean anything to me if there is no mention of social justice and real social justice.
Okay, the first part of the question was interesting. You said about the importance of social media, right? Something about the speed. Is that something you think is very significant in having kind of given rise to it?
I think when you say social media, I don't know if you feel like this, but people talk about social media as if it's a natural occurrence. It's as if there is this global public institution who is providing us with social media. It's not like that. There are companies, and these companies are profit-oriented entities. So, and they are huge companies. And they are uncontrollable by the nation states. Sorry. So we are talking about companies actually determining what the truth is, what the politics is, and so on and so forth. So it's not social media as a how can I say it, homogeneous occurrence, natural occurrence. It is companies who is deciding what's going to happen. So I do think that we should really underline the fact that it's companies, big multinational, giant companies, who is deciding who is going to speak, what they're going to speak, what they're going to like, and so on and so forth. And they are also deciding what we want and what we are interested in, and so on. So we cannot speak about social media without speaking the fact about there are giant, uncontrollable, profit-oriented entities in the world who is determining every big concept that we are dealing with.
Agency matters, yes, and we've certainly seen that with Cambridge Analytica and with Facebook accountability and so on.
There is this, Brexit thing coming now, the HBO series. That's interesting because I thought Cumberbatch, what's his name? Cumberbatch? Huh? Benedict Cumberbatch. He lost his hair, in the HBO series for Brexit.
You mean Dominic Cummings? Oh, you mean can come back paying him? I see.
Anyway, so
I thought about that,
this is interesting. Everybody is waiting for these series. Everybody is exhausted with Brexit. Nobody wants to hear about it. But in order to understand what's going on right now, they are waiting for this HBO series to come out. How about that? This is very interesting. You know, when we're talking about truth and fiction, Netflixization of truth, and so on. People are waiting for Weiss to understand what happened, what really happened during George Bush era. You know.
Saw it last night. Don't mind for it.
I'm like a new generation. They don't know maybe. And there are films like that, series, Netflix series, HBO series. So actually now we are getting the facts from TV series. So or social media videos and so on. So there's a long story there to be talked about, but one very important thing that not to forget that there's profit-oriented entities who's determining the entire scene.
Watch Netflix. There's more. I think there's quite a few people. Do you mind if we come back to you if you've got time? I apologise. There's so many people.
Hello. In a nutshell, can you tell me, is it the 7 ways to lose a country? Is that right? There are 7 recommendations in your book. Or is it how you
7
lose it?
steps from democracy to dictatorship.
Can you tell us what they are?
But you wouldn't read the book then.
I'm a cheapskate. I'm trying to get it.
Okay, I always forget one. So it's create a movement because party is over. Disrupt rationale and terrorize the language. Remove the shame. Shameless is the new black, maybe. For what was it? Dismantle state mechanism. No, institutions. Dismantle the institutions. And 5 is let them laugh, because laughter is a comfortable zone or shelter. It's about political humor and how it's becoming a comfort zone for the opposition. And design your own citizen. And very last one, design your own country. Like it.
To the point.
Hi. I've got 2 very quick questions. So just one picking up on the point that the gentleman made about social media. One of the things that I find quite interesting about social media is how it gives platforms to different voices, and they get, they resonate. And what social media has done very successfully, I think, in polarizing opposite groups is it gives a voice to people, particularly in this country and in the US, who perhaps didn't have a voice before, so more of the ethnic minorities, women of color. And as they get louder and louder and, they all hear each other in their echo chambers and demand more, I think that's one of the things that puts the people who traditionally had those places of privilege in jeopardy, or it sort of affronts them. And I wonder whether you see any parallels in Turkey with that, with groups of people who didn't have a voice before and now have a louder voice, which is kind of related to my next question, because I wanted to ask whether you see any parallels between the Labour Party here, as in the opposition, so-called opposition here, and the traditional so-called opposition in Turkey, the CHP, because the CHP, which looks a lot like Labour in terms of the infighting, an ineffective leader, not being able to agree on anything, just being an absolute laughingstock. And it actually pushed, I think, many people away to HDP a few years ago, to Selahattin Demirtaş's party, who, I voted for them. I couldn't bring myself to vote for the opposition again. And I just wonder how we can actually bridge that gap between the opposition and the parties in power. Not to say that, we should be pandering to populists and finding common ground with them, but how do we actually bring an effective opposition movement together? And do you see any parallels between what's happening here and what's been happening in Turkey?
That requires 2 lectures in a row. About social media. Okay, I talked about profit and companies, and now I have to tell that this is a tool. This is still a tool. Yes, the medium shapes what we talk about and how we talk about it, and therefore how we think about concepts and human interactions and so on. But it is still a tool. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, whatever you're using. And it was used in Gezi uprising, in Tahrir, in Kasbah, in Tunis, in Greece, in Spain, whatever. People use this social media to get organized, to mobilize the masses. So when it's used like that, and as you said, to give a voice to minorities or people on the periphery and so on, so it can be used like that. And when it's used like that, it's a wondrous thing, because during Tahrir or Gezi, it was so interesting to see that people were choosing people over the big news network logos. They weren't trusting New York Times, let's say, I'm just throwing names here, or CNN International, but they were rather trusting a guy with a nickname who is talking from Tahrir. This is very humane, this is very good, because I do think that people really, as in Nokia, advertisement, were connecting to each other, and they were having the amazing taste of being one globally. When it's used like that, social media, yes, of course, it goes beyond the fact that these companies are run by profit-oriented, people. As for the similarities, I think British people do not like me drawing similarities between Britain and Turkey.
Oh, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're not one of them? Are you Irish or something? No, it is. Turkey was, in the limelight for quite a time, like around beginning of 2000s. And everybody wanted to talk about Turkey then. Now, nobody wants to talk about Turkey. It's so interesting as a, writer who have been writing about Turkey for the last 15, 20 years, because when, they want to talk about it, it's like they want to put Turkey as the poster child of this political Islam, democratic Islamic country, and so on. It was so interesting. They didn't want me to talk, and they don't want to talk about Turkey now. And I want to talk about Turkey and the similarities between Britain and European countries with Turkey. So yeah, there are similarities, but I think we shouldn't push them a lot. We shouldn't, do this. Everything shouldn't be. We shouldn't put everything as in equals, because this country is very unique, as Turkey is. What we have to see through this mess, which is global, and I don't prefer to talk about people, leaders, or the parties at the moment. I prefer to talk about the general zeitgeist, which is determining what we are going through. And it is more important than to talk about leaders or their efficiency or inefficiency. Because even if Trump is not there, even if Boris Johnson is not there, there'll be another Boris Johnson. The system, this system creates a Boris Johnson. Therefore, Boris Johnson or Trump is there because of consequence of series of reactions, political reactions, chain reactions. So even if they're gone, or even if the political opposition leader is more charismatic, it doesn't change anything. As long as the masses, as long as the people do not believe in another country is possible, another world is possible, I don't think that leaders can change anything.
If you get questions in the back, if we can, it would be great.
Thanks. I describe myself as a sort of ardent Remainer, but when you were talking, I began feeling quite defensive of Brexiteers, because when we talk about how to lose a country, when you talk to most Brexiteers, that is exactly what they think that they're losing. So they have a competing vision of the country they're losing, and that's free movement, borders, immigration, ever closer political union. Exactly what you said about dictatorship with a different face. to them, Brussels is a dictatorship with a different face. And really, this is a reaction to sort of to globalization. It's the same with Putin, his supporters, and the same in the US and Trump. Now, surely, with all these movements, they're about sort of 50-50 in the society. At some point, we're going to have to co-opt that 50% in order to win an election, to win the White House back from Trump or another president like Trump. You sound like you're very entrenched that there is an absolute standard that we shouldn't compromise. But how are we to judge how to balance these two competing problems of actually winning a sort of a common vision for our democracies without giving way to some of these demands from the 50% of the population?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but there is this several countries at the moment, China, Russia, Turkey, and Britain, they're doing these movies now about their, the great past, their history. You have the Boleyn girl. All of a sudden we started to watch Anne Boleyn, the other Boleyn girl, Boleyn or Boleyn, I don't know, I cannot pronounce it, or Henry VIII and so on. All of a sudden, or Crown, there are all these cultural productions referring to the great past of Great Britain. And in Turkey we had that too, when populism was rising. We had the Magnificent Century, referring back to Suleiman the Magnificent. And several other countries are doing the same thing. I think what you're telling is pretty much related to this. All these people, they were talking, when you said Brussels was the dictator, we are actually a great country, we cannot be, oppressed by the dictators in Brussels and so on. There is this anger, and it is articulated in this manner. They want to be great again. And every populist gives makes the same promise to their people. So there is what is there? Why is the need for being great again? So there must be a pride issue there, right? Their dignity. They feel like their dignity has been crushed somehow. That's why they probably want to be great again. They want to shake off this embarrassment and humiliation, and they want to be great again. This goes for every country, by the way. Every country that is experiencing right-wing populism. So I think the pride is broken because of this horrible oppression of moral, economic, and political oppression of neoliberal system, but they are not giving this explanation, but rather they're giving the explanation, these guys in Brussels, or in case of Turkey, it is these guys in, I don't know, the elitists who are reading books and so on. Or in the United States, it's the elites in New York Times or CNN International. So at the very heart of the issue, I think, there's a broken pride and the anger coming out of that, broken pride. So how do we mend it? I think this should be our question. The question shouldn't be how we are going to talk to them or how we are going to, not to them, how we are going to beat the populist leader, but what is our remedy for this broken pride? And how we are going to explain that their pride is not broken by some illusionary enemy, but rather their own political choices. This is a complicated story, of course, obviously. And people do not like complicated stories, so they go for the simple one. Of course, it's not that simple, but I'm simplifying the story in order to give an answer, but I think at the very heart of this issue is broken pride.
Like, can I just add something to that, which is I think your book, you talk about, you just said it, there's something about populism going back, isn't there? There's something about getting America great again, going back to the past. And I think that's something about the populism does have a particular appeal. It's given up on the utopia, the idea of building a brand new future. It's about, I've lost something. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I'd like to get there. I'd call that, it wants to get back to a heartland, is what I would.
When was the last time you saw a film about a better world?
Really? Yeah, no.
They don't make any films about a better world. They don't have any idea what a better world would look like. But we have all these horrible future, projections of future in literature, in movies, and so on. So why wasting all this energy to think of a, apocalyptic end, whereas we can think about the remedy?
The other thing I think the question raises is about how you construct across a polarized society, how you build bridges, and how you build something across that, isn't it? I mean, that's difficult. Sorry, we need the mic. Sorry, he's going to kill me if I don't let you hold the mic for a second again. I'll lose my right arm or something.
Sorry to hog really quickly. I don't know if you've re-engineered sort of the Gene Sharp principles, because he wrote this book called From Dictatorship to Democracy, which is involved in taking pillars of support away from the government, institutions away from the government, rather than hacking at the top. So similarly, if you've got two opposing forces, movements, then you would have to have a strategy that affected the same thing. You would have to take the pillars of the movement, be that the Brexit movement, if that's immigration, various different things. So in effect, you have to bring them across to your side. That seems to be the only logical way that you could.
Well, today I actually proposed a sort of funny way to get rid of this Brexit problem for you. It's like, stop the live broadcasting from Parliament to start with, so let everybody forget about it for a while, and then pretend that nothing happened, and then everything will be fine, because nobody wants to talk about it anymore. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore, right?
I do. Never ask a professor of politics. But another question, sorry, can I... Back there, and we'll move up the front in a moment. I thought you had somebody. It's a populist dilemma. What can I say?
I liked your point about stopping broadcasting from Westminster. I'm a political journalist who covered Brexit. I have to say, I think your definition of populism may apply to Turkey, but it's somewhat naive to define it as right-wing, because there have been plenty of polls, including a recent one by John Curtis, which shows that people in this country are divided on Brexit lines, but no longer on political lines. And the gentleman who asked the question before me made a very good point, which is you do need to find commonality. It's all very well to say, I mean, movies about history have always happened. It's always been a problem in Britain. It's an island. They always have a fantasy approach to World War II. They've never been invaded. But, well, not for a very long time. But it's it strikes me as a little bit naive to try and give this political slant, because Brexit is precisely about a loss of faith in politics, whether it be to the left or to the right. It is just as much a problem for the Labour Party as it is for the Conservative Party. And you don't have an option but to fix it. And I'm wondering whether, in your book, which I haven't read and I look forward to reading, you give a solution to this engagement. By people. Well,
it's not that here's the solution with bullet points, but I try to hint it. I do not think that it's loss of faith in politics, but rather it's a forced depolitization, and what we started to see as politics is being diminished to this farce with only two options. You say that people are divided by the Brexit line, not political line. Actually, shows how tragic is the situation. There is no politics at all. So this is what happened in Turkey as well. This is what happened in Italy. Actually, the best example would be in Italy. Italy is in the book. It was Dario Fo, the theater scriptwriter, who said Italy now needs absurdity. So they chose Beppe Grillo. The Beppe Grillo became the political leader. But this is not loss of faith in politics. This is something else. This is removal of politics from the social sphere. And this is I think, goes back to 1980s when lady with the Osprey bag, Margaret Thatcher, said there is no alternative. Then people started quitting politics. It was something dirty, and people didn't want... being a political subject was not only criminalized, as in Turkish case, for instance, but it became something something to be despised in other countries as well. I'm sure you heard the line so much, "Oh, I hate politics." This has become the motto of two generations, starting from 1980, and this is where we ended up. They do not know what politics is, and they do not know what choices they have, and they go, "I don't feel like Brexit is a good thing," and everything became about feelings, not about thoughts. And this is a cultural phenomena that has invaded the entire space. I think. They are all interconnected to each other. But I don't think that people lost faith in politics. It's just they forgot what politics were.
But you could argue that people are more politically engaged than ever before.
No, I don't think so. They are more energized, but they are not politically engaged. Making jokes and joining the competition of making the most sarcastic joke about Brexit is not doing politics.
But they're voting more.
Yeah, they are.
That's politics.
I don't. They are. What did you say?
They're voting more.
Voting more. Voting more is not a good thing, by the way. If the percentage of voting is higher, that means not a good thing. Voting is not democracy. Voting is not politics. Voting is the minimum, is the most primitive form of politics. Politics is far bigger and far deeper, and everything is politics. The lipstick you use, the people you talk, the water you drink. Everything is politics, and somehow. Through different ways, people have been made forget that. So they do think that now they hate ideology. They don't want to talk about ideology without knowing that this is the most ideological statement one can put out.
Sorry, there was a question. I cut someone off there earlier, so I feel bad about excluding them. And we'll come to you.
I don't think you really understand Brexit. I voted to leave the European Union. My wife voted to remain. We still get on. We discuss it endlessly. Most people in the UK are quite divided on it in the sense of it being a Trump issue. Trump is a polarizing force. I detest Trump. I have a huge problem with Trump. A lot of people do. But in America, it's pro-Trump or anti-Trump. But you're simplifying Brexit. And you're trivializing the people who voted, by definition, you're trivializing the people like me who voted to leave. I found it very difficult. I still find it a very complex issue. I don't find Donald Trump at all a complex issue. So I think you need to, because in our country at the moment you've got extremes like Matthew Paris, who writes his weekly diatribe in the Times against people who voted leave. It's so boring. The people who are interesting on Brexit are the people who are looking like this gentleman here at why did a lot of intelligent people vote to leave and still would vote to leave. So what do you feel about that? Does that make
I don't feel good about that.
No, okay.
I think you're agreeing with him, right?
No, I will be on the other side.
I want to say let the mic get to you so we can get your voice.
This is the ever first time I have been political since I left Turkey 30 years ago. I was on the streets campaigning for Remain, and how can I not be political if I can make a decision? I live in a democratic country. I think we should separate populism in different countries. I don't agree with your approach to history either.
Mm-hmm.
We allow ourselves to own history. Just watching this or that history things, people will make historical films. You have the right not to watch them. We have choices. We apply those choices. Anthony voted for Leave. He's my best friend. I voted for Leave. In Turkey, you cannot be friends with people who are in the opposition. Recently, I have been talking to a Mexican friend who have a populist party in leadership, left. So, left or right, we are talking about populism here. And as Paul was saying, the populism has got weapons. We need to see these carefully. So
it's good that this is becoming a very good conversation. I like it. Despite
we are not
nobody's
talking
agreeing
about
with me.
Right-wing populism or left-wing populism.
Okay.
The weapons of populism is really dangerous. We have it in this country as well. I had people who were voting for Leave just because they wanted a change, because it was on the headlines. So brainwashing has been one of those Weimar Republic tactics, It has been going on for those who don't have the education and the the wisdom of making choices for themselves.
I see. Okay. I don't want to understand Brexit. That's not my job. That's your job. Because I cannot understand your country as much as you do, as you cannot understand my country as much as I do. But I know that when you're a citizen of a country and when you're bothered, when your mind and heart is busy with the predicaments of that country, it is hard to simplify things, and when somebody else simplifies them, you feel that it is unfair and that it is diminishing and insulting, humiliating, and so on. I felt that for several years when British and American intellectuals simplified my country, saying that, wow, this country is the model. Turkey is a model country for moderate Islam. That I don't, I was on the wrong side for criticizing political Islam and so on and so forth. So it is good that the tables are turned to start with, because now I'm talking about your country, not my country. But I have to tell you that this book is not about Brexit. This book is not about Trump. This book is not about any populist leader, including Mr. Erdogan. This book is about us, who are seriously bothered by the fact that something is changing and it's not going somewhere good. People who are, getting uncomfortable with the fact that there's a mess of moral values. Even the basic moral values are disintegrating in a way. We are watching dead babies washing ashore, and then we are seeing people who make fun of them. At least 10 years ago, people would be quiet about it. They wouldn't say a thing. They wouldn't really make fun of a dead baby or something. So where is this coming from, and how does it come together with the political insanity that we are going through? I am not telling every country and its unique environment in this book, but I am trying to see through the mess, global mess, political mess, and see the main logic, how it operates, what is the mechanism, how they operate, and how they polarize countries, how they create this hostility among people towards each other, and how they design this new human being who is without shame, who has this schizophrenic logic, who thinks that there are multiple truths and you can choose any of them according to your liking, and so on and so forth. So who designed this human being, and what is this human capable of? Actually, this book is trying to see that. So it's not against the people who voted for Brexit, or it's not for the people who voted for Remain, or it's not for the people who reject to watch, British Empire movies or something. It's something for, it is about something about more basic, something happening to human being, all of us. And one feels really alone when he or she thinks that it is only me now, or we are very few people who are really, terrified. So we should retreat. We should retreat to our own gated communities. We should retreat to our own group of friends, where we can, be secure and so on. So this book is for those people, and this book is trying to encourage them to see people like them in other countries, and to call them to come together to have a global conversation about what to do about this.
I think we have to, when we think about politics, we have to think comparatively. We have to think broadly, and I think the book does do that. I mean, I think that, perhaps we've done a disservice by saying what we learned from Turkey. The book is very global in that sense. I think you are distilling stuff, and I will say, the one thing I will say is, whenever you distill stuff and you say, these are what seem to me the common elements, that you touch them back down in some of the cases, people might well disagree, but that's the nature of politics. Well, that doesn't really describe the Brexit I know, but that's the very nature of politics I think that you're trying to revive.
What I distill from two countries as in commonalities is the fact that people ask me, did I lose a country? Is that why I wrote this book? Am I now in exile? Am I in exile? Am I not going back to Turkey, and so on and so forth? And I want to ask them, if I am in exile, who would be that British person? What would we call that British person who runs to the Spanish embassy to get a passport before 29th of March? Is he in exile? This country is full of exiles, in fact, right now. Some of them left the country, some of them are about to leave the country, and some of them, even though they're in homeland, they don't feel like they are in their homeland as they know it. So, we're all exiles, more or less, I think.
Question over there.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion. I'm particularly interested in sort of what dominates political discourse, and what social divisions and what spurs and sort of helps social divisions grow. And I think actually Brexit is a really interesting example to go off, because actually I didn't have any particularly strong feelings about Brexit at all. I still actually am somewhere sort of on the line, not quite sure where we should be on it. But I do think that it was, I think there's a really interesting thing. I'm surprised it hasn't come up around the role of the media in pushing particular social divisions and pushing particular red lines and forcing people into corners on issues actually that they didn't feel particularly strongly about before. And I think what's happened is that we're now not talking, and I think in Turkey, I'm from Turkey originally as well, and in Turkey I think we have the same problem where people stop talking about the issues that really impact them. We stop talking about homelessness, we stop talking about economic problems, we stop talking about the fact that young people aren't able to find jobs, all of these things that our society is really struggling with, and we start to talk about something that's primarily impacting the political establishment, and the negotiations are happening mainly around kind of trade and the red line is that we don't want immigration, right? The government's clear on that. The rest of it is all up for discussion. So everybody but the common people, people who are really struggling and who are going to get the worst deal out of Brexit either way, so it's turned in against the general populace. So I'm really interested in sort of how you see the role of the media in pushing this discourse and pushing people into corners that they never thought they would be in the first place, and then finding it difficult to sort of come out of that space. And the other thing that I'm interested about is that democracy for me has always been really hard. Historically it's so hard won. People have lost their lives for the right to vote and for the right to protest, and democratic movements have really changed the landscape across the world, not just in Turkey but in England and other places. So where does that leave us? If this is a guide for what not to do, what does that mean for a movement of people wherever, in Turkey, across Europe? What do we do to build a movement that can really change politics for the better, and where we can find some sort of common consensus again that can create that better world that you mentioned?
Okay, very briefly, I think we're running out of time, no? Or?
5-10 minutes, yeah? Yeah.
Okay. In terms of media, I think the most important thing, this obsession, not obsession, it is mixing objectivity with neutrality. It has historic reasons, starting from 70s, and today there's this, let's keep the balance. Let's be careful about the balance. Hygienically, they're trying to keep the balance. So if somebody talks, again, I don't want to talk about Brexit anymore. Let's say against Trump, somebody has to be for Trump, even though this guy is an insane guy or whatever. Even if he doesn't say anything. So this balance is one thing. That's it's because news became this entertainment stuff. They have to be contradicting each other. There has to be the debate and so on. In 5 minutes, how can you debate anything? In 40 minutes, how can you debate anything? And TV is not a news. It's not a news source. It's an entertainment thing, basically. One. Second, this objectivity and neutrality. Journalists started thinking that they do not have any stand. They are basically the transmitters of news and views. And this affected, first of all, the profession, and second, how we see the news. And that is why you feel like, probably you do, you feel like you're cornered into one extreme or another extreme. I think that's the most important thing about media is this objectivity and neutrality and the balance, the so-called balance thing. And what was the second question? I forgot though.
Democracy is really hard won. How do we build any sort of movement that can change the politics for better or get that well?
I think we are doing that right now. There was this outcry, so to speak, during the uprisings in Egypt, in Gezi, in Greece, and everywhere else. And then there is now either retreat of these movements, or they have been swallowed by the conventional politics, and they have been melted. They have melted into Kafkaesque corridors of traditional politics. These guys. But it's so early to tell, and we are still struggling with several things at the same time. One, what is truth? There's this question still. Second, rising right-wing populism. And third, the world is disintegrating, and so on. And there are several other, serious problems we're dealing with. I think something will come out of it. And that is why I want a global conversation, not to initiate an uprising necessarily, but not to forget that thing happened a few years ago. In 2013, the world was rising up. So let's not forget that. It seems like it was a century ago, but actually it was 7 years ago. And we shouldn't pretend that it didn't happen, and we should be following up on that, I think.
Time for a couple more, and then we'll, Catch my eye, want to be the last one.
My name's Ben, I'm a television journalist. I've just got two quick questions to put to you. You mentioned that, I get the impression you sort of feel like democracy has been lost in Turkey. But Recep Tayyip Erdogan will not live forever. Is there any hope that you have? Do you invest in any hope in the future of Turkey? My second question is, what are your thoughts on the events that are unfolding in Caracas and across the state of Venezuela? Given that you have a growing momentum to overthrow the president of that country, Nicolás Maduro. I'm just interested in your insight into those two topics. Thank you.
I've been asked about hope for how many times I don't remember now. I don't know why people are so want to talk about hope, because there are times that there is no hope. Basically, there might be, and then what are you going to do when there is no hope? And I want to tell. I always wanted to tell, and I was told, in fact, that even when there is no hope, there is the determination. What are you going to do when there is no hope? You're going to vanish into thin air? No, you're going to stay and be yourself and keep being yourself. And this will happen even though there is no hope. One, and second, in terms of Turkey, and actually in terms of every country who experienced right-wing populism in such extreme, they create new, one of the titles of this book is Create Your Citizens. They create their own citizens, and they create generations. So it's not easy. It's not like about one man. What are you going to do with the millions of people who worship him? What are you going to do with the millions of people who would worship such a guy right after his death, let's say? That's the problem. And as for Venezuela, I was there when Proceso began, and I wrote a book about it. It's called "We're Making a Revolution Here, Señorita." It was a quote from one of the state officials when Chavez came to power. I went there, for several weeks, and then I was interviewing him. And it was in PDVSA, the petroleum company, and I was asking about the figures, numbers, and so on. And at the end, he was so bored, and he said, "We're making a revolution here, señorita. Leave me alone." So that became the. It's a very good title, very good code, in fact, to talk about left-wing populism. Yeah, we're making a revolution here, don't mess with me, sort of. People are talking about Venezuela, and I feel for that country because they're talking about Maduro. They're talking about the other guy. I always forget his name, the new guy. And they're talking about Trump. And Putin, of course. It's so funny, as if these countries do not have any other people living in them. When I talk about Turkey for years, I'm sitting here, and there was always a photograph of Recep Tayyip Erdogan here. So as if my existence is connected to his. No, there are two choices there. So for Venezuela, there were real people who really wanted real change and who suffered for it. It wasn't Chavez. And when Proceso was happening, it wasn't Chavez, and Chavez was not really taken seriously, and then he became this dictator. Of course, there were in the beginning the signs of it already, but it was so funny. I was there, and then I wrote the book, and 2 years later, I was giving a speech with ambassador of Venezuela, and this story is in the book, in fact. And all of a sudden, this ambassador started telling me the story of revolution in Venezuela in front of the audience, and he was talking about there was a fig tree on top of the hill, and Chavez was there with his friends, and then they swear, they promise, they put their hands on the Bible. I was thinking, it didn't happen like that. There were real people, they were on the streets and so on. But this is how it works. There's the reality and there's the history, the story, and it depends on who writes the story about the past. So I think when you start bending the reality, bending the truth, people start losing faith in their past, in the political power, and so on. And this is why it is very, very tragic what happened there.
One final question at the back.
Actually, I'd like to ask a bit of a lighter question. I'm a huge fan of Women Who Blow on Knots.
Oh, great, thank you.
I was wondering how you approached this differently to your fiction, and also wanted to ask if you have any new projects planned yet.
New project. My editor is here, so. Thank you for bringing up my novel, Women Who Blow on Us. Yeah, when I was writing this book, I felt so, how do you say, contaminated. You are subjected to all the evils of the world, and you think like, oh my God, we're going to end up in a big apocalypse, and it's coming now, and oceans are boiling. Nobody understands that. The world will explode, and so on. And when you're looking at the evil side of human too much, you start to get. When you visit evil through writing, you cannot come back from it completely pure, let's say. You feel really dirty inside. So after writing this book, actually, I wrote a book in Turkish just to keep my sanity. And it's called The Encyclopedia of Non-Existent Birds. It's a funny book. I made up some birds and stories about them and so on. Obviously, I have to write something about something that contains beauty, that has beauty, because I need to believe in beauty myself in order to write about it. So I want to deal with beauty rather than banality, sort of, because this book is about banality, not banality of evil, but evil of banality.
Well, that's a nice light note to end on. Can I say a huge thank you? The book itself is very broad and very challenging. I think you've challenged us and we've challenged you. And
it was a very nice conversation.
It's a very passionate book that you should read, and it does raise real issues about those broad agendas and about the dangers of democracy. I think that passion comes through. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Really, thank you for being here.
We love it.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll stay around to talk.
Yeah, sure.